All right, we're back. So brought the EXR sequence into After Effects. I'm going to create a composition from it, just like we've done before. I'm not sure what that wants me to do. Tracker, track camera, let it do its thing. What did I say before? Only 82 frames. It's not going to take too long. Okay, so this looks good. It's fast now, good. So I'm going to select my features. In this case, I'm not, I've done this before with this shot. This is how I actually did the furry balls. I used After Effects to do that. What's that? Is that your fans? Not this time. It's not me. That's me. Okay, so select your features. I'm happy with those. Right click, set ground plane and origin. Right click again. Create solid and camera. Test it out. Success. Remember, if this doesn't look good, start over. Maybe you need better footage. Maybe you need to pick different tracking points. It's not going to get better. Don't move forward if this does not look good. Okay. I'm going to maybe I'll be a little bit cute about this and try to position this so it's actually part of the grid, so I can see if there's any drift or anything like that. So I'm going to try to line it up with this corner. It's not going to be perfect because even that seam right there is a little elevated. But let's check it out. Oh, look at that corner, folks. That looks good to me. That's what I like to see. Yeah. I feel good about that. Where's that drift? So that's pretty good. One useful thing that you could do at this point, before we even go into the 3D stuff, and this is something that I like to do every now and then. I don't know if I'm going to do this now in the interest of time, but you could render this out right now with that primitive plane in there, and I would use that as an alignment object, which means if I brought that into Cinema and I saw that my 3D plane in Cinema was out of sync with the video footage of the 3D plane that got tracked in After Effects, it'd be very obvious to me right away. If there's a difference, there shouldn't be a difference. If there's a difference, something's wrong. Is it my frame rate? Is it something else? I might even go and bring this footage with the plane baked into the video footage as my backplate into Unreal. Same thing. If my 3D plane in Unreal is out of sync, it's not lining up with the video footage backplate, something's wrong. If you didn't do that, you're working just with this, maybe it's a little bit harder to diagnose the problem. But if you baked the plane into the footage, it's just one more thing that you can use to troubleshoot any potential problems. Does that make sense? Thing that I found useful historically. All right. So let's go and get into some 3D. So now I'm going to export this to Cinema 4D. I'm going to save my project first because I think it's going to complain about saving a project. Call it something vague. Go to File, Export, Maxon Cinema 4D Exporter. Click on that. Doesn't look like anything happened. Oh, there it is. Okay. Gives me an error message. Hey, there's 2D layers here. Those are not going to be exported. The 2D layers in this case are the background plate, the EXR sequence of her on the chair. That's fine. You don't need to export that. Just export the 3D camera and the solid. It's just not going to export the image sequence. Absolutely fine. We're going to recreate that anyways in Cinema. What do I want to call it? I'll just call this C4D. And ta-da, I now have a Maxon Cinema 4D file created on my computer. If I double click to this now, it's going to open up C4D, whichever version you have installed. In my case, I have the light version installed. See, it says C4D Lite up in the top left. Hooray, I'm in Cinema 4D right now. I am looking through my camera. In Cinema, you can tell which camera you're looking through by the label up here on the top. 3D camera tracker, or 3D tracker camera. That's what it was called in After Effects. I suppose if you renamed this, it would be named that in Cinema. Don't know for sure. I don't think I've ever renamed the 3D tracker camera before. If I grabbed onto the timeline down in the bottom here, I know that my footage is 82 frames long. So if I grab onto this, I should see it animate in three-dimensional space. In Cinema 4D, like any 3D program, there's what's called a four-up view. You get 4 windows, front, top, perspective view, or camera view, and maybe another side view. The way that you can get into that in Cinema is by middle-clicking. Whatever window you middle-click on while your mouse is over it, that's the window that goes full screen. Just one of a lot of different ways to get that view. If I go and look at this view, for instance, a side view here, and I do my timeline, I can see my camera move a little bit. It's not that much camera movement, but it's definitely moving. If I switched my camera from the tracked camera, if I go and click on this up top here, this is just like a little UI 101 here. If I click on this here and I click default camera, now I am in a disembodied camera that's not tied to any sort of keyframes, and I can move around. Navigation in Cinema is pretty much the same as in Unreal. You hold down the Alt key and you can left mouse click to navigate around. I know in Unreal you don't necessarily have to hold Alt down, but that's another way that you can navigate. Using Alt or Option is the way that most actual 3D programs are navigated. So if I looked at this now and I move it, you can see my camera's moving. If I aligned myself over here, I can start to imagine this camera movement happening in three-dimensional space, aligning with the plane, aligning with the picture of the girl on the backdrop. Remember, it's all just pulling that three-dimensional depth out of the video footage and then just aligning those things in three-dimensional space. When it's all aligned properly, it looks like everything's sitting on top of the right spot. If you look at it from the side, you see that it's actually pulled apart. Actually, you know, the distance that the camera is from this plane is actually the real world distance that it was shot at too, or at least proportionally the real distance that it was shot at in the real world. Not necessary to know, but still neat to think about. I'm going to click up top again, change from default camera back to the 3D camera tracker. You don't need to change the default camera really at all. It's only useful if you want to get like a different perspective view or anything. Also, if you need to solve any problems. And there is a problem here. I don't know if anybody's noticed yet. Does anybody notice the problem yet? Besides not having a background plate, it's not a problem. We just haven't made it yet. Nobody noticed yet? Okay. You will see. That's how I look when I know, like I know what I'm doing. I create the problems and I solve the problems, and everybody's like, ooh, that guy knows what he's doing. No frame rate. We wouldn't be able to tell actually with the frame rate because we have nothing to compare it against, right? Look at the grid and its relationship with the plane. What's it? It's not anchored to something. The center doesn't matter necessarily because it wasn't centered here. But you're right, it's not anchored. Right, exactly. Why am I seeing a parallax between the grid and the green plane? It looks like the green plane is floating on top of the grid, right? There should be zero parallax because the green plane should be on the grid. And if I did look at it from the side, look at that. Huh. It's not on the grid. What the hell? To be honest, again, full disclosure, I don't feel super comfortable using Cinema. I can do things with it, but it's not my primary 3D program. I actually don't know why this happens, exporting the 3D camera tracker from After Effects to Cinema. Maybe somebody that's more familiar with Cinema can answer that question for us or solve it over the course of the next week. It's not a huge deal. We're going to fix it manually. It also presents an interesting opportunity to show you that things like this can happen and why this is problematic. But I don't know why this happens. I don't know. It's one of them things. So we're going to have to fix that. We're not going to fix that right away, though, because I want to go and do something else first. So where's the material manager here? Okay. So the first thing that I want to do is I need to put the background plate back in. I need to put the video back in so I can make sure things are even aligned properly, right? You don't necessarily have to do that in order to export the 3D camera, but we should probably make sure everything's aligned properly because in this case right now, because of that disparity in height, it's not aligned properly. So let's go ahead and put a background in. So we can do this by going to Create, Environment, Background. Create Environment, Background. And that's going to create a background that exists infinitely behind everything. This is not like a plane that is positioned in 3D space. A background is behind everything else, regardless of what you put in it. Right now, the background is white because we haven't put a material on it. So I'm going to open up the material manager here. Window, material manager. Guess you don't really need to open the material manager to create a material, but still good to just see where they're all at. I only have one material here right now, just the color green for that plane. Very exciting. I'm going to create a new material. So click on Create, New Default Material. Also Control N on a Windows computer. Create a new material. If you want to name it something, you can. It's not really that important. I'm going to double click it. I'm going to double click it and get the material editor. Now I need to tell this material what texture is it using. The texture that I want it to use is the EXR sequence of the video. The image sequence. So I need to assign that. So in the texture slot right here, I'm going to go ahead and click on these little three dots over on the right. I'm going to browse to wherever I downloaded that. Select the first of the image sequence, click open. It's going to ask me, do you want to copy this to some interior Cinema 4D directory to keep everything organized? I'm going to say no, because I'm happy with where it's at. And after that, you see that the image pops up. At this point, I could put the material on my background. All I got to do is click it and drag it and drop it on top of my background. So I'm going to click and hold and drag it onto my background. And that assigns the material to my background, or any surface, a cube, anything. You just drag and drop materials. However, if I drag the timeline now, cool, I have a one image background. Obviously, it's not synced up because the video footage is not playing. The image sequence is not sequencing. I need to tell this material that this is not just a single image, that this is an image sequence. Okay? So in the material editor for that material, again, if you closed it down, you can always just double click on it. If for some reason you don't have this menu, you can always go back up to Window, Material Manager. In the material editor, I'm going to click on the drop down for texture, just the little drop down for texture. And right now it's set to shader, which is just a static thing. I need to click animation. And not only do I need to click animation, but I need to go down here in the animation details and click calculate. Calculate is going to calculate how many frames are in the image sequence, let Cinema 4D know that it is an image sequence. Click calculate. As soon as I click calculate, I don't know if you noticed, but the video footage jumped to the appropriate frame. So I already dragged my material on the background. If I scrub now, still doesn't do it. What the heck is the problem? Dun dun dun. Is this one of these Cinema 4D problems? Maybe I have to do it again. Click the drop down, animation, reload image. No. Oh, okay. No, it's still not playing. What the heck? Oh, there's a setting. Help me out, Cinema 4D people. There's a setting that shows, like, do you want the preview to play live? Does anybody animate preview, I think is what it is. Let's try it. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. Creating problems, solving problems. Stick with me, folks. That's all right. We had to go in the viewport tab anyways. So if yours is not updating for whatever reason, that's by design, because image sequences, video footage, using that as textures is actually a pretty intense thing to do for the computer, let alone if you're rendering. So by default, that is turned off. What we need to do next, after we have selected animation, click calculate, the next thing that we need to do is click on this little viewport section. I was going to go to viewport before that problem popped up to increase the resolution of this, because it's really mushy looking. Also by design, because again, textures that are big are really computationally intense for rendering. So what I needed to check to get that preview to pop up was this little checkbox, animate preview. As soon as I do that, we should see it. Let's drag it back to 0. As soon as I click the box, you should see it update to the right frame. Boop. And now I'm back in business. Forgot that step, but didn't panic and solve the problem. What I originally came here to solve was the mushiness of this texture. And right now the texture preview size is using the default. I'm not entirely sure what the default is off the top of my head, but it's very low resolution. I'm going to set this to something so it doesn't quite look so crappy. Obviously, this is going to depend on your GPU, if it can handle it or not. I think this looks all right. This is about half the resolution of the actual video footage. No, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. 3/4 the resolution of the video footage. I'm happy with that. I think it's important to increase the fidelity because if you're trying to make sure that there's no weirdness in your camera track, you don't want to be comparing it against something mushy, obviously, right? So preview it here. The only thing that we're actually exporting from Cinema is the camera into Unreal. And maybe that's solid too, just so we can have a 3D object in Unreal to work with out of the gate. All right, so I can go ahead and close this material editor down.
You drag the material into the background and it started working, right? But it's just not working.
Boom. Boom. Oh no, I deleted everything. Let's do it again. I don't have a background. I need to create a background. So going to create environment background. Create environment background. Background is going to be white or whatever your default color is because it doesn't have a material on it. I need to create a new material. Maybe you don't see this window for the materials over here. That's the way I'm doing this because I'm a Cinema 4D noob. You can go to Window, Material Manager, and that's where all of your materials for your project live. Right now, the only material I have is the green solid. I need to create a new one. Create new default material. I'm going to double click on that. I'm going to click on the color section. This is also where you would set all the properties of a material. If the material had an alpha, if it had transparency to it. These settings are more important if you're actually using Cinema 4D as a renderer. In our case, we're using Unreal as a renderer. So, we don't really need to mess with these things. But when I'm in color, now I need to select the texture. So in the texture section, click on the 3 dots over on the right. Browse to wherever you have that image sequence located. This is where my EXRs are. Open. It's going to ask me, hey, this isn't in the default project path. Do you want to copy it there? No, I do not, because I don't want any more random copied files on my hard drive. Now it's just a still image. If I wanted to at this point, I can go ahead and drag it onto my background. I just need to click and drag on from the material and drop it onto the background. After you do that, you will see the little material preview on that layer. That material preview is on any layer that you apply the material to. If I open this up and went to the solid, you would see that track solid has material preview for that little green material. Again, at this point, it doesn't play because I haven't told it to play. I need to click on the drop down for texture. I need to go to the animation. I guess it remembered. I need to click calculate. That hasn't set the movie end or start frames yet. Calculate will do that. As soon as I click calculate, it identifies that the end frame is frame 81, making for a total of 82 frames. Still, it should not preview correctly because I need to go into viewport and check the box for animate preview. While I'm here, I'm also going to change the texture preview size to something a little bit more higher res. Just looking at that blurriness makes me dizzy. Success? Did you get it? Which step was missing?
The background, the green was there, but the background was not there.
Oh, okay.
So dragging it to the background was somewhat.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of steps, and if you miss one of them, it falls apart. But this process that we're doing, you are gonna do this a lot for the rest of the semester, especially going into the final project. Every shot you will do this process for. Camera track, bring it into Cinema, export the camera from Cinema to Unreal every single time. So we're going to get very familiar with this pipeline. Any questions so far? Okay. Well, that all looks well and good, but remember we had that misalignment problem that was going on, right? The plane not actually sitting on the grid. So once I start to introduce other 3D objects here, placing them on the grid, expecting them to sync up appropriately, they're not. So let's go ahead and demo that. I'm going to go ahead and create another plane. Create is where you create stuff in Cinema. Create, I'm going to get a mesh primitive. I'm just going to get another plane. I'm going to drag my plane into my scene. Drag it around with the translation arrows. If I click on the object details over here on the right, if I go to coordinate, X, Y, and Z, Y says it's at 0 height, so it's actually located on the grid. Any new object that you create in a 3D program by default, as intended, they put their origin on the grid to make things easy for us. I'm maybe going to scale this up a little bit. Oops. Another funny thing that I just realized, opening this up today on the laptop, I don't usually use this laptop except for classes, and this is a newer version of Cinema than what I'm used to. So the toolbars look a little bit different while I'm doing this live. I think this is 4.25 or 25. I mean, I'm not sure if that's the newest, but it's newer than the version I'm using, at least on my desktop. I think I'm on 24. There was some UI changes somewhere in there. So I'm panicking a little bit. I don't know if you can tell. You can see the sweat running down my face. So, all right. So I align the plane, and if I look in the default camera view, you can see that unlike the green plane, which came over from After Effects, this one is actually situated on the grid, right? It's also, if I look at the coordinate details for it, the Y value is 0, which is up and down. So I should feel good about this, right? Well, this is where it starts to fall apart. If I play this now, oh no, it's not stuck. What is going on? This is the problem that was introduced by importing from After Effects. And After Effects, for some reason, again, I don't know why, hopefully somebody can solve this problem for us. If you do, you get a gold star. For whatever reason, After Effects decided that the floor for this solid, and by relationship, the floor for the camera, is not at 0. But it's actually at, for whatever reason, 675. 675 centimeters above the grid. That's so much. That's such a big difference. And that's why my new plane that I brought in, that's actually at 0, looks like it's flying off the edge of the screen. I'm willing to bet that if I took this plane and I moved it to 675, well, it's going to completely mess up the orientation. If I went over here and I changed this to 675 instead of 639, don't do this. I'm doing it the wrong way, and then I'll show you the right way. Now it's at 675. I bet if I scrub now, oh, look at that. Now it's stuck. So this whole problem is caused because After Effects didn't make the grid actually at 0. It made the grid for some reason at 675. And I'm not entirely sure why. But what we're going to do is we're going to fix that problem. Okay? We're going to fix After Effects' mistake. And it's pretty simple to do. So if I click on the green solid and I look at its height, the Y value, it actually is at 0. The problem is that what it's parented to, this After Effects file with the long Blackmagic camera extension, that parented value, if I click on that, that's what's at 675. I don't know why, but it is. So if I change this to 0, see how the grid moved up and down? See how I'm actually moving the grid? You don't want to just move the solid, because then you're just moving the solid. We want to move the solid and the camera. It's important that we maintain the relationship between the solid and the camera when we move them together, right? Because if we move them separately, it's all going to get misaligned. So by changing that value, I'm going to change it to 0. So it's actually the grid. Now if I scrub, everything is still perfectly aligned, but also the floor is the floor. If I go in and I look at my other 3D view, I'm going to try to align this. Good enough. If I go in and look at my other 3D camera view, now they're both sitting on the grid, right? The camera has also moved down. Make sense? Yeah, I don't know what that is, if that's a bug or if that's a feature. Not sure why. I tried to figure it out. Actually tried to figure it out all summer. Not all summer, come on. Maybe just like August. I tried to figure out in August when I made the determination that we were going to switch from Maya to Cinema 4D, so you didn't have to use an old plugin. And I don't know why. I'm sure maybe it's a simple reason, but I don't know why. So whether it's 675 or some other number, the point is that we need to bring that parented thing, the parented object that the 3D camera tracker and the track solid are parented to, we need to bring that down and make the Y value 0. End of story. Okay. Well, let's have a little bit of more fun here. I want to leave enough time, like we did last week, like a half an hour, to just solve some problems, workshop time in class too. I'm going to have a little bit of fun here. I'm going to create a cube. I'm going to place that in my world. An important thing to note is that the origin of the cube, the center of the cube, is what bisects the grid. So if I want my cube to sit on the grid, I have to raise it up, right? How much do I need to raise it up by? Well, that really is dependent on how big it is. Right now, the cube is 200 by 200 by 200 centimeters. So if I raised it up, I'd have to raise it up by what? 100, right? Halfway, to raise it halfway up. I'm going to scale it up a little bit. I'm going to try to make it look like, I'm going to try to scale it up so it looks like one of these boxes on the floor. maybe that one, I'll get rid of the plane. You can actually see it's not sitting on the grid right now. See, the grid is going through it. So what size is this? I'm going to click on the cube. 458, that's a crazy number. Why don't we make this 500, 500, 500. Good enough. I'm happy with that. So then I'm going to go to coordinate, and I'm going to make it, oh, it's half of 500, 250. Now it's sitting on the grid. If I dragged it over top of my plane, you can very easily see that it's not sticking through it anymore unless I lower it back down. So that's the proper height. I'm just going to move it over here. 3D object. You know, I could go crazy with these things and just place tons of 3D objects all around her if I wanted to. Oops. Starting to look 3D. So this is just simple cubes, but at this point, it could be any 3D model, right? And this is your test preview. Does it work? And I would say mission accomplished. It does work. So at this point, if we weren't going into Unreal, you would just build your scene in Cinema and render it out. Just like I did with the furry balls, right? Oh, I restarted my computer. I closed that down. Just like with the fuzzy things in the final video. Didn't use Unreal at all for that because it wasn't an appropriate place. So this is an example of using the 3D camera tracker just into Cinema if you wanted to stop at Cinema. I would suggest not stopping unless you want to go through rendering times. But you absolutely could. That's much more of a traditional VFX workflow. Any questions? So when we go into Unreal, next class, we're going to start using this thing in Unreal called Composure. Composure is the compositing pipeline in Unreal. Composure allows us to create foregrounds, backgrounds, media plates, video footage, and also mats to create masks for our objects. So when we render stuff out from Unreal, to bring it back into After Effects to composite for our final, we are able to render out the foreground separately from the background pieces, right? If I wanted to see an example of that in Cinema, ignoring Unreal while we're here, you know, if I tried to put this object behind her now, it won't go behind her because she's on the background, and the background says nothing goes behind me because I'm the background, right? So if I wanted to get fancy here, or if I was just doing Cinema, I could create, wait for it, what do you think it's called? Foreground. Foreground, create another material, one that perhaps has the rotoed out version of her. Do all the same stuff that we did before. Animation, calculate, drag the material onto the foreground. Except now the foreground's covering up everything. Also, the foreground is black. This is a little bit of a bonus, so I wouldn't necessarily worry about this. Just in lieu of going into Unreal next week, I just want to show you the idea about piecing things together for compositing purposes. So by default, even though this image does have, this EXR sequence does have an alpha channel in it, on C4D doesn't do that by default because alphas are expensive. So I'm going to say this does have an alpha channel. Checkbox. And then go and tell it which image it is, which is the exact same one. Same thing, animate preview. Now it's the low res on top of the high res. That's kind of crazy. Why are they both not animating? That's fine. Maybe the foreground is just not the right frames. Anybody have a clue? Cinema people? Cinema people are like, man, you're on your own on this one. I don't know. Thanks a lot, y'all. You got yourself into this mess. Oh. Because I didn't set it to animation? No. It is animation. It is calculate. Reload. Alpha. Oh. Duh. When I set the alpha, notice that the alpha is staying the same. It's like, yo, okay, for the material, the color information, yeah, that's an image sequence, but I'm a dumb piece of software and I only do what you tell me to. And you never told me that the alpha was animated. Never crossed my mind that that wouldn't be obvious, but it's just because I didn't make the alpha animation. Calculate. Look at that. But I don't want that one to go in the background. Oops. Oops. What I was trying to do was show this one goes in the background now. This one's kind of messed up. I'm sure there's a way with compositing features in Cinema, but I actually don't know how to do like an order of operations and say, all right, this is the foreground, but allow these objects to exist in front of the foreground. I assume you can, but I don't know how to do that off the top of my head. So now that I have a foreground, everything is the foreground, even things that should be in front of her until I turn them off. But that's okay, because usually what you would do when rendering out from Unreal or from a 3D program, you would select your objects that are foreground elements. What I would usually do is I would create a folder here, and maybe I have multiple cubes in the foreground, right? And I would group all of these. Why can I not select this arrow? Here we go. This one is a background one. Get out of there. I would group all of these things. I would render out the cubes by themselves, right? I would render out just these two cubes and nothing else. And then I would turn these two cubes off in the foreground and I would render out just the background ones. So what I would ultimately end up with is two different image sequences, one for the background elements, one for the foreground elements. And then when I bring them back into After Effects, sandwich them together with my video footage in between, ta-da. We're going to do a similar thing with Unreal. We're going to render out our foreground image plate from Composure, we're going to render out our background image plate from Composure, and we're going to sandwich them together in After Effects after the fact. The last step, if you had a full version of Cinema, you could go to File, Export. Unfortunately, I'm using the light version, so it just says empty, so I can't export. But the way that we can get a light version out is I would just save this file again. And we're going to use a plugin in Unreal that's specifically for Cinema 4D. We're going to use the Datasmith plugin in Unreal. That's going to import our entire Cinema 4D scene into Unreal. So rather than just importing a camera, we're going to import the entire scene. One, this workaround is to allow us to be able to use Cinema 4D Lite because we're cheapskates, right? And two, sometimes, or actually I would say all the time, or maybe I'm just not that familiar with Cinema, when exporting the camera and saving it as an FBX file from Cinema, because Cinema has Y is up in Cinema, in Unreal Z is up. So when you import a camera from Cinema into Unreal, the orientation is flipped, which is a little annoying. You have to manually flip it in Unreal. Using Datasmith, for whatever reason, not whatever reason, it makes sense that Datasmith does this. Unreal understands this is a Cinema 4D file, properly aligned camera for me. So it solves us being cheapskates, and it also solves us flipping the camera. So it's actually nice using Datasmith. But that's the process. The next step is we open the Cinema 4D file in Unreal. Are you prepared for that? Step 3 of our match motion pipeline, and that's what we'll do next class. I get concerned with this pipeline that is overwhelming. I do this for so many projects. I've been doing this for a long time that even then it still seems like quite a tedious process to go through. My concern is just I don't want anybody to feel too overwhelmed by it. And based off of some of the results of the homework from last week, not tracking, I just want to make sure we're not getting out too far ahead of ourselves, and only exacerbating things by me shoveling more technical stuff at you and you're like, yo, I can't even get the camera to track, So if you feel like that, I understand. And if we can't solve those problems in class, then please reach out to me, okay? Happy to do office hours and help you solve whatever problem. It's probably something simple, and it'll be a quick fix, okay? But don't want to scare you, but composure is also not a simple thing. What we did in here with Cinema, a lot easier than Composure. Composure there's like no documentation on it, first off, online. Your documentation is me. And this class, honestly. Me and Todd a couple years ago, if you know Todd, we got a student assistant and we wanted to develop the curriculum for this class. And we were like, man, there's just like no documentation on how to do this. There's a couple people on YouTube that do it, or just a tiny piece of it. They skip a bunch of steps like YouTube tutorials do. And you're like, yo, you missed all this stuff, And we really just hammered down on the pipeline to create this class. So yeah, it's not an easy thing. So not to scare you, but that's next week. Not something we can do in the remaining half an hour of this class. So the rest of class, if you're able to, I would like you to give this a shot and see if you epically fail or not. And if you epically fail, I'm here to help you not epically fail. Don't be nervous. It'll be okay. On a more light-hearted note, I don't know if y'all saw through the grapevine or your internet travels or what Derek posted. I know a couple of y'all saw because like people's minds are being blown here. But in the newer, it hasn't been released yet, but in Unreal Engine 5.1, which is on the horizon, I don't know the timeline of its release. Apparently, you have to go on GitHub to download it right now. At least that's what Derek was saying. It's not even in the launcher. But they are streamlining the process for bringing in videos into Unreal. Okay, watch this video. It's as simple as like dragging it in and dropping it.
Drag the video scene and media plates. Drag the file, drag the video scene, and you're done. Media plates. Drag the file.
No media textures, no media players, no image media sequence. None of that bullshit. It just works. Now, the caveat here, I don't know if this works with our pipeline. We don't really just bring videos. We don't bring MP4 videos of dogs into Unreal Engine and click play. We do not do that in this class. We are above that. So I don't know if it works with our pipeline. I don't know if it works with Composure. Also, this is beta Unreal Engine, so I'm not comfortable with using it in this class yet. If you want to try it out on your own, go ahead. Tell us how it is. But unless it releases in like the next couple of weeks, I'm not going to go ahead and use it myself. I don't have time to investigate it either right now. But that's on the horizon. That's pretty sweet. Because, man, I've created thousands of media players. And it's so annoying. Pretty cool. Yeah, exactly. Imagine doing 2 steps instead of 20. Yeah. Story of my life in a lot of ways. All right, anybody need any help? Can I help with anything? Can I walk around?
The footage in my obviously blurry and white.
Oh, sure. So if you double click on the material, you have to change the setting in the viewport for the material. And you go to texture preview size and just change that to something higher than the default. Yep. Solving problems. So your assignment for next week is to just show documentation that you can do this. Put 3D objects in Cinema, have it all synced up. I don't care if they're cubes. I don't care if they're giant Pikachus. I don't care what it is. I just need to know that it sticks to the floor and you're comfortable with going from After Effects to Cinema and then stopping there, because we'll pick up next class and do the last step. So yeah, transfer your camera data from, not Maya. Oh, I have a slash there. Okay. You can use Maya if you want to, but you have to get the older version. Also, Cinema 4D also does camera tracking natively. I'm not comfortable enough with it to teach it, but if you want to investigate it and use that, you could skip After Effects. I don't know if the tracker in Cinema is better than After Effects. I don't know. I don't know the constraints of that, but you're welcome to use that. I teach you this pipeline, but if you know shortcuts or you want to use a different way and it achieves the same goal in the end, that's perfectly fine. And then next week we are fully in Unreal and using Composure. Then we have one more compositing class, and then it's pretty much just about making stuff. Oh, next week. I think next week we're going to do our safety training for the downstairs lab as a group. Has anybody done it individually yet? Sorry, we're going to do that again. Unless you decide as a group you all just want to do it individually. Not my safety training. It's not 5 minutes. Safety training is 5 minutes. I think we have a problem. Are you aware of this, sir?
I haven't done any yet because nobody comes in at my hours. 20 hours in the morning.
That's because I heard your safety training is 2 hours long.
Wait, what? Oh, you don't have to. You just come in at 8 a.m. to 8 a.m.
When are your hours?
8 a.m. to 12 p.m.
Every day during the week?
Every day except Wednesday.
All right.
All weekdays except Wednesday, 8 to 12. 8 to 12. Yeah.
There we go. Or come to class next week.
Okay.
Yeah.